EA Games. Worse than Activision? Maybe. Worse than Hitler? Most definitely. Now let's talk about why.
Genesis.
Does.
Genesis.
Does.
Genesis.
Does.
Genesis.
Does.
Genesis does.
What Nintendo?
In 1989, Sega was the little guy. They were doing well in the arcades, but the Sega Master System had all but been pushed out of the US market by the NES. They had one more chance to prove that they could do what Nintendo don't, and so they made their first 16-bit console, the Sega Mega Drive, known in the US as the Genesis because Mega Drive was taken. It was their marketing and overall business strategy from that point on to show that Sega was ready to play with the big dogs, that they could compete one-on-one with Nintendo and win. So with the release of the Genesis, or the Mega Drive, things were going pretty well for Sega. Their sales were up, they were starting to gain popularity due to the 16-bit graphics of the system over the 8-bit graphics of the NES, and things were just basically going pretty well. Until they hit a massive roadblock that I like to call Electronic Arts. Now this is all based on my knowledge of events, things that I've heard have happened. I'm not comfortable saying that this is 100% truthful, so what I'll say is some of this actually happened. EA Games didn't really have a presence in the home console market in the late 80s. So when an EA representative walked into the Sega offices, it was a bit of a surprise. They came asking for a partnership with Sega, but not the normal kind. The EA representative said that Sega's licensing fees were simply too high. Sega charged about $8 per cartridge for licensing fees to third parties, and this EA representative said that $2 sounded a lot better, and that if they refused, that they would let pirate cartridges out to other developers. See, EA had reverse engineered their own cartridges and were prepared to manufacture them for others. So this was terrorism in its most basic form. Electronic Arts were exerting their will over Sega, and they won. Sega bent, under one condition, that EA was to support Sega over their competitors, that they were to give Sega first priority over Nintendo, and EA held up this end of the bargain, up until the Dreamcast, when they completely betrayed Sega and cut all support. But we're talking about the Genesis. And EA created some of the Genesis's best games, one of which was a little motorcycle racing game you may have heard of, Road Rash. Let's take a look. The gameplay in Road Rash is simple, but completely badass. You speed down 5 California state routes and basically just beat the shit out of anybody between you and the finish line. Basic road hazards, oncoming traffic, and police officers are obstacles along the way, but your main competition is going to be other racers who will punch and kick at you. One rider in each race also has a billy club. If you can manage to punch them without them hitting you off your bike first, you get to keep the club for the remainder of the race. The club is an extremely powerful weapon that will pretty much knock anybody off their bike in one hit. The player can choose from 8 bikes in total, each bought with winnings from previous races. Each bike offers tweaks to speed and handling, but visually there's no difference other than a color swap. The game's controls are really tight and precise, which really surprised me. Usually I don't like playing racers on a D-pad, but this one is extremely satisfying. The track selection may be the game's greatest downfall. With only 5 tracks in total, collecting all of the bikes and completing all 5 difficulty levels can be a chore. Even worse, many of the tracks look exactly the same, most of them being green countryside speckled with trees. There is a desert track there too, but nothing really to write home about. Later in the game, this problem can become visually fatiguing, as difficulty levels, aside from adding quicker and more aggressive bikers and more traffic, merely add length to the existing 5 tracks. Would it be so much to ask for a new track every difficulty level or two? Maybe a city track or a mountainous one. I'm not an expert on the Genesis's power, but it doesn't seem too large a leap to add a little variation. The other worst thing ever about this game is the lack of a proper save function. It instead features a ridiculously long password. I mean, it's 1991 for Christ's sake. I thought we were over this. Graphically, the game is something else. It might not be much to look at by today's standard, but for the time, hot damn. That blast processing really shows. It really makes you wonder why Nintendo didn't jump on this presentation style for Super Mario Kart, which came out almost a whole year after Road Rash. Maybe it really is blast processing. The soundtrack to Road Rash is completely kick-ass. It gets your blood pumping and gets you ready to club some bikers to death. You have the option to turn the music off in races, but really, why would you? Yeah, it turns out motorbikes, which don't really sound pleasant in real life, sound even worse on 16-bit hardware. Who'da thunk it? So that's Road Rash. It's a great game despite its flaws, and if you're into racers, I'd go pick it up today. It's one of the best pirate carts that I own. That's right, it's a pirate cart. And that's fine. Road Rash is a pirate cart. This is a Genesis cart. See the difference? EA are just like Wisdom Tree. The only difference between EA and Wisdom Tree is money. The only difference between EA and Tengen is power. And the only difference between EA and the Chinese child who assembled this pirate Bubble Bobble cartridge? Well, there's not much difference at all. Children bully to get their way. So do EA. We've seen that. EA are pirates, plain and simple, even if they've forgotten it. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe.